Hey, Tori.
Hi.
Okay. Yeah, so basically, I mean, today we wrote a little article on pricing and the strategy behind it. So, I think most people think that pricing a home is really just like looking at Zillow and then pulling a few comps and picking a number. But I don't think that's how a strong pricing strategy at least works. So, uh, in our opinion, pricing itself is one of the most strategic and important parts of the selling process. So that's kind of what we just want to highlight some of the takeaways from that conversation.
Yeah, definitely.
But yeah,
Um, yeah, I mean, everybody talks about comps, and obviously comps are important, but even within that, there's so much nuance within the comps. What season did it sell in? There's just so many different things. And it just depends on the current condition and also active listings and that kind of thing.
yeah, yeah, 100%. 100%. I mean, I think so. We've basically got four things we want to talk about. This article we wrote has seven things, but I mean, the first one is that pricing is not a number; it's a strategy. So, effectively, most people again think about it as looking at Zillow, talking with their agent, and kind of getting that confirmation that it is worth this price, right? A lot of times, they're talking to three or four agents, and they're end up going with the one that just gives them the price that they thought it was initially, which
Hmm.
isn't a strategy. That's hoping you get lucky, which you certainly can too. Sometimes, to your point, like you know, are you looking at comps that are from the winter, but now it's a good spring?
Yeah.
Does your market have very little competition? So, that those would all be things that would maybe get you lucky on that price. But the reality around the strategy also is, basically knowing what the goals, like what your goals are, the timing, the condition of the home, obviously, but then the
Mm,
competition that you're facing as a seller. So one of the things we do a lot of times is like last minute, could be the day before. We've already predetermined a price, but now we just realized that we've got two other homes that just hit the market that are almost identical, and maybe they're priced higher than we were anticipating. So the question is like, where do we go? Do we bump it up a little bit, or do we just stay right underneath them?
hmm.
And then again, just like reassessing, the current market condition.
Hmm.
So I don't know if you wanted to add anything to that, but yeah.
Well, yeah, and it's like kind of the next part is sold comps matter, but active comps matter as well. It's like, it's sold, we know that data. It's done, it's sold, that's what it's sold for, right? So we can compare it and that's great. But then what if there's a huge influx of inventory and right now active on the market that impacts the value even though this sold for X? So it's more than just looking at the sold data, and again, like you said earlier, it depends on the season and so many factors and the weather. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess and I don't know if this is exactly what you just said, but like I think sold homes, they give you history and history repeats itself. But the active properties are a lot of times just as important. So like,
Yeah.
for example, right now we're working with a couple people, we're talking about pricing, we're kind of confirming that pricing that we've discussed or whatever, but we're not going on the market for another couple months.
Hmm.
And so I would be we would be lying to ourselves and to our clients if we said for certain that was actually the price that we should go at. Because again, when we're talking about pricing in the winter, a lot of times like it's going to be good news come spring, but it might not. So
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
where really the active stuff is just as important. So, uh, I guess because the other part is like we always say, market value is what someone's willing to pay for it. But market value is really what you can just determine on paper, and then it's a strategy, right? So if you go overpriced, and then we don't get any interest, and then someone comes in, writes an offer, only one person writes an offer. Like technically, I guess that's market price. But if we would have had a better strategy, we
Hmm.
could have bumped up that market price. So, but again, it comes down to like how much competition are we actually facing, and like how many buyers are out in the world, buying
Exactly.
buying homes.
Exactly.
So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, yeah. And then the third part is that the market gives feedback fast. And it's very true. I mean, the first several weeks of the listing are very telling of where we're at on price. Are there, you know, how many showings have we had at the open house? How many numbers came through? What's the feedback? There's just so many relevant things. And again, those first couple weeks are so important to tell where we're at. And there's obviously outliers if we have a random snow day or
Yeah.
something happens in the world that kind of, shakes things up. There's things, but just in general, that immediate feedback is super important. And if we're not seeing anything, then, we might need to make an adjustment at some point.
Yeah, and I think the other thing is, like, the opposite can happen. So, where maybe we've got a bit of a fixer or it's just a little rough around the edges when you see it in person, but the
Hmm.
photos make it look fantastic.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
you get a lot of interest
Yes.
or at least a lot of people through the home.
Hmm.
So, technically, like, we got just enough preparation, the photos look good, the marketing's great, pricing's fair on paper, and then we get a bunch of
Hmm.
people through, and then we get no offers, and we can't even force out an offer. So, you know, that's feedback too, and I think that's a harder feedback, at least from my experience with sellers, is like that is harder for them to
Confusing.
understand. Yeah. Yeah, it's a
Yeah.
lot of noise, but
Yeah.
it's nothing real, nothing tangible. And, for us, it's like on average right now, I think it's about roughly around 4 to 5 showings per offer. Whereas like in the COVID era when everything was crazy, it was like maybe 10 showings an offer, but you get 100 people through, you
Yeah.
know. So
Yeah.
and now it's like people just come. It's just a little bit slower out there, but
Hmm.
so we don't need the yeah, we don't need 40 showings. So that's why that feedback and that it's either we get a lot of feedback that is not helpful, or
Yes.
we get no feedback, which is also not
Which is
helpful.
also unhelpful.
Yeah,
Yeah. So
yeah,
pricing it right is helpful.
yes, yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
So I think the kind of the last thing is more of like, I don't know, our ethos, I guess, right? Is basically trying to figure out how do we maximize a seller's value and then also minimizing that friction,
Hmm.
because those two things don't always go hand in hand, but that is always the goal. So again, like, you know, getting top dollar is almost certainly not about like just pricing it high, right? It's that whole preparation that went into it. Um, it's the timing. You brought up the weather one time. If it's a snow
Hmm.
day, like, could we anticipate a snow day? I mean, it's weird. Like it says it's going to rain
Sometimes.
10 days in a row, and sometimes it's
Hmm.
sunny.
Yeah.
And then the other thing
Hmm.
happens where we didn't anticipate the snow. But if we know something for sure is coming, like maybe just avoid that a little bit. Um, and then the other part of the friction, like once you get an offer, I think for a lot of people, the friction begins, like even more friction begins during that kind of negotiation, the inspection period. Whether or not it's real, meaning like whether or not the buyer actually even asks for anything, but that sitting around and waiting period just gives most people, most good freight people, like a lot of anxiety. And
Yes.
so, there's a ton of, yeah, I think I wrote about this a little bit, but there's a lot of psychology that says, if you're given a dollar and someone takes a dollar back from you, taking that dollar is way more impactful than giving you that dollar. So where that shows up a lot with, our situations, like, for example, say you wanted $1 million for your home and that would be a perfect world. You'd be just ecstatic if you got that. Let's say we end up with a $1.1 million offer, and you're over the moon now, and then they start negotiating. It ends up settling at that 1.05 or something. Um, that to most people feels exactly the same as just getting that $1 million out of the gates
Hmm.
without any ask. So it's like, there's a like, we want to make sure we can try to minimize the friction, but at the same time we have to maximize value, right? So we're trying to
Yep.
figure out how do we, we'll deal with the stressful part. Um, you just kind of sit back and wait.
Hmm.
Let us handle
Hmm.
that. We'll try to remove all the, try to deal with any problems that come up before, you know, obviously if a seller needs to know, they need to know. But for the most part, we can handle most, things and get better, suggest better outcomes. Yeah, I mean that's really it. But I didn't even share my screen here, but basically, if we'll tag it here, but the article is called "Why Pricing a Home is More Strategic Than Most Sellers Realize." We're putting everything on Green Buck Real Estate Insights, so that's where you can find our articles.
Yep.